So, I had given up on waiting on a new season of Red vs. Blue, especially since the last 4 seasons hadn't been ones that I enjoyed. Yes, I liked parts of them, but overall, I just didn't like the execution. But then I saw on Facebook an advertisement that said, Red vs. Blue Restoration, written by Bernie Burns. And seeing that Bernie was back blew my mind and hyped me up. So, after watching the trailer, I have a few thoughts. So seeing that they finally got Bernie back to write and got Matt back to direct gives me a lot of hope for this, and seeing that it's the final season gives me more hope as well. I know a lot of people aren't looking forward to the fact that this is the final season, but given that the last 4 seasons have dropped in quality and interest for the fan base, I think that if they come back and make a really good season, they should just leave it at that, so we don't end up having the show fall down a hill even further. If we get a good ending, I'm fine with it ending at season 19. Like, I would hate to see Red vs. Blue become like the Shizno Paradox or Zero again after this season. I imagine, and this is just speculation, Bernie came back under the stipulation that this is his final season and the show is finished, so it can end on a high note. That's just a guess. I have no evidence to support that. That's just my theory. But when I started the trailer, seeing that the trailer started at the end of season 13 when Church has everything paused and is leaving his message for the Reds and Blues was awesome. And it looks like they're going back to that moment and starting fresh. But it also comes across like season 15, 16, 17, and 0 are simulations that he was running to see if the Reds and Blues can survive the situation on the staff of Charon. But it sounds like he's trying to prepare them for what's coming after that. Some people were speculating that the whole season is just going to be simulations that Church is running. I think personally that'd be a waste of time, and I don't see why Bernie would return for that. I think what's going to happen is, in this trailer, he says, let's run one more simulation, and that simulation is going to play out in season 19, RVB Restoration. It's not going to be a simulation, it's going to be the Reds and Blues living the actual simulation that Church came up with last, to get off the staff of Charon and survive the situation he's preparing them for in the future. And then Church is going to delete himself like he did at the end of season 13. I do not think he's going to make it through this, because otherwise I think the sacrifice would have been pointless. Like I've seen a few people say in the comments section, Bernie coming back and making this the final season, it naturally makes sense to have Epsilon still sacrifice himself. Otherwise, what's the point? A handful of fans have been speculating that this season isn't actually retconning 15 through 0. It's just a clever way of showing in the trailer the last 20 years of Red vs. Blue preparing for the finale. I think if that were the case, framing it like Church is still in season 13 trying to figure out how to get them off the staff of Charon is a misdirect and would kind of be a dick move. So I don't think that's the case. I think the show is actually rewinding back to season 13's ending. And they're trying to make it so 15, 16, 17, and 0 are simulations Church is running. My question is, how does Church know there's going to be another major threat for them to face after Charon? And why would he run simulations based off of season 15, 16, 17, and 0 if the events in those seasons can't actually happen? So my thought is, what if this is what's going on? We see that he's got memories of season 1 through 14 on the monitors while he's trying to figure out these simulations. And I still think 14 is going to be canon, because everything that happened in that season that was canon happens before the Chorus trilogy. So it's all origin stories, so it's still going to happen. But I think basically he's looking at season 1 through 14 and analyzing patterns in their history to figure out what they're going to do after the Staff of Charon fight, when they survive it, to predict what happens in 15, 16, 17, and 0. However, because they're simulations, that doesn't mean that's exactly how it's going to go. They're just predictions, not fact. But also the thing is, if Church is predicting things from those 4 seasons, that has to mean some of those things in season 15, 16, 17, and 0 actually exist. So is it possible that while on Chorus, Church was in one of the temples, maybe the Temple of Vision, and got some of the information from that temple and just lied about having seen static? And then maybe he got a lot of information off of the Staff of Charon when he was sending all those files everywhere in the galaxy to incriminate the chairman and all of his associates. And then Church sees something and knows something's coming. So once they survive the Staff of Charon fight, he has to prepare them for what's coming, and that's what's going to be the season RVB restoration, in my opinion. And obviously, one of the first things I thought of when I saw the trailer was, oh man, that means a lot of my theories could still actually be possible. But I know that's probably not what everyone wants to hear. But regardless, my point being that I think if 15, 16, 17, and 0 are actually simulations, then some of those things probably exist. Like, it's possible that the cosmic powers exist in some capacity, maybe just as AI constructs like Santa. Maybe they don't have as many god powers as they did in those seasons. You know, maybe something like Black Lotus exists. Maybe something like the Ultimate Power exists. You know, we saw Spencer Porkinson's armor, and we don't know much about him. We saw in season 17, Wash was in the labyrinth and was fighting soldiers that looked just like Spencer Porkinson. And then the Ultimate Power's armor has the same helmet. And I wouldn't doubt, you know, if there was some sort of connection to that, you know, especially with, you know, if Church has information about the future, slipping some of that information into the labyrinth traps to maybe test Wash in the simulation to see, you know, how he would fare against one-horned, you know, soldiers that look like Spencer Porkinson, as well as the Reds and Blues. And in that simulation, obviously, they fail, except for Wash. But I think stuff like that could happen. Maybe it's possible that those seasons could get some sort of send-off in this season, while also kind of saying a lot of it didn't happen, but a lot of good things about it happened, but the bad things didn't. They could explain that the wacky things in 15 through 17 happened as a way of Church saying that, well, all these other things are failing, so let's try some off-the-wall stuff, you know what I mean? Like, see how they can handle this off-the-wall power stuff just in case this threat is that powerful. You know, and then we find out what it actually is in RVB Restoration. Like in the trailer, who I think is Sigma, this villain-looking character in the shadows, he's suggesting, you really think this is possible? Pointing out some of the scenes from RVB 0 with Faze teleporting. And Church says, well, that's just cool. How about you stop being an asshole? And maybe, like, you know, some of that stuff exists, but Church is giving her that teleportation knife as, you know, just a test to see if the Reds and Blues or Washington, Carolina can stop someone like that, but also counting the fact that the space pirates actually had technology like teleportation. Like, for example, he could have just taken the teleportation cubes that he knows about and put them into a scenario where maybe they found a way to put those teleportation cubes into a knife or something, you know, and that could explain why Faze has a teleportation knife. And honestly, I think this could imply that time travel could still be real in Red versus Blue, just not as exaggerated as it was in 15 through 17. And we also have to consider the fact that in this scene, Tucker has the metasuit, and the last time we saw the metasuit, it had the time distortion unit in it. And I think it's possible because Church is running so many simulations, and he even says time means something different to me now in this trailer. He could be utilizing the power of the time distortion unit to kind of run these millions of simulations and roll back the characters if they were to fail certain situations. Maybe they have already run some of this and failed, and so Church is reversing things with the time distortion unit to try it again. You know what I mean? Like actual real-life testing some of these simulations by having them loop through time with the time distortion unit. I think it's possible that they could be doing that. And honestly, if they're going to go ahead and say that 15, 16, 17, and 0 are simulations, that would have to imply that some part of those seasons were real. You know what I mean? Like, Church wouldn't waste his time trying to save his friends from the Staff of Charon fight and prepare them for something later if none of the stuff in his simulations was real. You know what I mean? He's just wasting his time. I think this is the perfect opportunity for them to take what we got the last 4 seasons and kind of rein it in a little bit to fit more of what we had in season 13. What happens after the fight on the Staff of Charon could be a mixture of all the stuff we had the last 4 years, but the tone would be fixed. Any of the good things that happened in those last few seasons could return. Some of the characters could remember it because of the simulations Church laid out to them. They could still remember some of the lessons and messages that they got in those 4 seasons, but they wouldn't have actually lived them, but they remember them. They're aware of certain things that could happen. And if they encounter something that's different well, then they'll have to account for it in some of the simulations. Maybe churches actually, come up with a way to fix that. Maybe 15, 16, 17, and 0 were the first simulation, and then after everything went bad in those simulations, he went backwards and tried to redo a lot of those events and continued to try to figure out ways to fix those 4 seasons. Sigma even says, or who I think is Sigma, even says, you've run so many simulations, you've run millions of them. And so I think he's probably run many different variations of what happened in the last 4 seasons. That means there could be another version of Genkins out there, but not named Genkins, maybe just Jenkins, maybe a better answer to the Jenkins character. We could still have Temple, but he could be different. You know what I mean? We could still have Zero, we could still have Shatter Squad, we could still have Black Lotus, but they would be readjusted a bit better to fit the tone of Red versus Blue. Some of the stuff wouldn't even have to happen in the order that it happened. Like Zero's people could attack first, because that lines up with the events of Season 13 with Charon and their space pirates out there in the galaxy stealing alien tech. And that could lead into something like 15, 16, and 17. Kind of how, at the end of Season 15, Temple and his crew were going against the UNSC, and their plan ultimately resulted in time travel being started because Krovos used them for his plans. Church could have done the simulations in certain orders to test certain things first. He wouldn't know when certain threats would show up first, so he ran them in different orders. And then maybe after 15, 16, 17, and 0, he would go back and say, okay, so let's reorganize what happens in those 4 seasons and see what happens then, like how we can get out of this. What are the probabilities of us surviving all of this if this happens first instead of this? But you could also take other things from the timeline and try to make that canon. Like, for example, the Meta versus Carolina fight could be one of those simulations. I personally think that could be made into the dream Carolina had about Sigma in Season 12, but that's just one of the many options. There's one detail in this trailer that I realized that gets me a little hopeful for what could be happening. Well, for one, on one of the computer screens, we see the spiral from when the Reds and Blues were thrown into the future in Season 3, so that's actually something that Church remembers. Yeah, you could say it's a bit meta and it's just there for the trailer, but on the other hand, it could also be something that Church just remembers. But then there's the fact that while he's trying to run these simulations, he's struggling. He's trying to figure out the right way to get them out of this, and he can't figure it out. And he wants to run one more simulation, but who we believe is Sigma says,
"But you're forgetting something, aren't you? Oh, you can feel it, something right at the edges of your mind. A lost memory. Oh, like you always say,
memory is the key."
And that could be something that he's forgetting, and if he remembers that memory, it could help him figure out the right simulation to get the characters out. And I've seen a few people suggest that maybe that memory could be Beta, Tex, that Church has to bring back and use her. Personally, I don't know if that's the case. It's possible that, given where Church is right now, he's falling into the same situation the director was in Season 10, where he has to figure out a way to save his friends, as opposed to the director trying to find a way to save Allison. And that's what Sigma's talking about in the end. They'll both be at the same place, and he'll be waiting for him, because Sigma's the ambition of the director. He wants to rebuild the Alpha. He wants to make the director great again. And no, I don't think this is a parallel to the political shit in the real world. It just happens to be that way, especially since a lot of fans say the show isn't really good anymore, and the season's called Restoration. Like, they're restoring the reputation of the show, they're restoring the meta, they're restoring the Alpha, and they could be restoring the timeline. I think it's possible that the memory he's talking about could be something that he's forgetting in all of these memories he's analyzing to come up with a solution. And there's only one thing I can think of that he could be forgetting, especially if he's reliving all the events of Blood Gulch all the way up to Season 13 and using all that to create a future that involves time travel and ancient aliens and Krovos and Black Lotus and all of that stuff. It could be the thing that's not even brought up in those 4 seasons. The fact that time travel exists in those seasons and the prophecy is mentioned in those seasons They don't mention the time traveler prophecy from 3 through 5. Maybe it's just wishful thinking on my part, because I hate the way they handled it the last 4 seasons. But I think because Bernie's returned, he could be back to answer all the questions we want to know about the show. And once it's finished, it's answered, it's paid off. And he's avoided time travel in his seasons when he was writing it, answering things about the time travel because, like I said in some of my other videos, he's treating it like the Reds and Blues faces. Once we know what it looks like, we're going to be disappointed because we had our own ideas. But I think since 15 through 17 already brought time travel back and connected the time travel to a prophecy in Ancient Aliens, I think that's the perfect opportunity for him to tie all of this stuff together and answer once and for all how all this could make sense. That missing memory, that moment that the characters don't know about, because even the Reds and Blues didn't know what happened in that scenario. They guessed a few things, but no one actually told them what happened in that moment. They're on Sidewinder, bomb blows up, and then they wake up in the desert. Okay? And we don't know what happens in that time. I'm pretty sure Caboose wouldn't know what happened in the time loop. And Caboose is the one who filled in Epsilon's memories of what happened with the Alpha and the Reds and Blues, but he didn't get to see that part of the Alpha's story. If the last 4 seasons are now only possible futures predicted by Church, this is the perfect opportunity to end the excuse that 3 through 5 were just simulations and fake. Tie it all together. If a time travel trilogy was a viable option to prepare the Reds and Blues for the future past the Staff of Charon fight, then the time travel needs explaining from the previous seasons. That should be the missing memory. Epsilon is looking for that missing piece of the puzzle, the lost memory, right at the edge of his mind. And I think we could get that answer. I don't personally believe that Tex is that lost memory he's trying to resurface and recover, because as we see, she keeps popping up on the screens. He remembers her in some way, but I don't know how she would be the answer to fixing this. Maybe because of brute strength? I don't know. Maybe he's giving her to Tucker's armor. It's always possible. I don't know what they would have to recast Tex, because I doubt they could get Kathleen back. As far as Sigma goes, I think there was a definite theme with him in the Chorus trilogy that he existed in Church's memories, but all the fragments tried to ignore him, and Carolina would have dreams of him. I don't believe that this whole season is just going to be Church running simulations and fighting Sigma off. I think that would be a waste of a season. They would have to show what really happens after the Staff of Charon fight. The Reds and Blues using the simulation Church created. Or at least that's my opinion. And as far as that goes, I hope this season is actually a full-length season like previous seasons. RVB 0 was 8 episodes, and I don't think they had enough time to explore all the ideas they wanted to explore, especially since they put so many damn ideas into that season. And I think that's one of the downsides of that season. Like, I told someone once that RVB 0 felt like a trailer for the trilogy at times, but there was no trilogy, it was just one season. And so I'm hoping that RVB Restoration has a full length, at least 19 episodes, you know what I mean? Like, I think if Bernie's coming back to write the finale, it has to be more than 8 episodes. It's got to be a full-length RVB season to really get the story paid off. Everything said that needs to be said. I hope that's the case. Honestly, I don't think the decision to retcon the last 4 seasons is really a slap in the face to the fans that liked it, just because, for one, you still have those seasons to watch. And whether or not they're technically canon, they seem to be possible futures that Church is predicting. So they are alternate worlds that exist. They're just not ones that end up connecting into season 19 Restoration. They may, I think it would be kind of cool if they took some of the plot points that were unresolved from 15 through 0 and found a way to spin them to be paid off before they even happen, you know what I mean? Like, Church predicts they're going to happen, and so he finds a way to fix it. And so they could technically still be canon to the people who like them and get resolved in this season, just in a very unorthodox way. You know what I mean? If I'm correct, and he's running simulations about time travel, he could be using Tucker's time distortion unit in his armor as a checkpoint system to test some of these simulations. You know what I mean? And then if they fail, he rolls back to that moment on the Staff of Charon, because maybe that fight on the Staff of Charon is the inciting incident that leads to what happens after the fight. And this is his checkpoint system to make sure it doesn't fail. He could be running simulations, but he could also be testing them for real and then reversing the event with the time device to try the next simulation, I think. And then we'll hopefully, with Bernie writing and Matt directing, get every answer that we've wanted, and then the show can be done. But then again, I could just be wishful thinking. Maybe it's just because I've spent several years devising theories based off of that concept, and I'm hoping now that they've retconned the last 4 seasons that they can actually do it. I'm also thinking to myself, if Epsilon's trying to find a way for the Reds and Blues to survive the fight on Staff of Charon so that they can be prepared for what's coming afterwards, how does Sigma play into that? You know what I mean? Maybe when Epsilon deletes himself in season 13, Sigma is now free. Now in this final version of his simulation to help the Reds and Blues has to account for the threat that Sigma is posing when he gets free. So once Epsilon's dead, he has a plan for the Reds and Blues to overcome Sigma as well as whatever the hell is to come. And I think that could be interesting. So Church has a way to defeat Sigma, or this new version of Sigma, after his death. And that could be what Sigma means in a way when he's like, in the end, that's where I'll be. That's where we'll be. Because when Epsilon finally has to do what he has to do and delete himself, Sigma will have the chance to take over the fragments, you know what I mean? And reform the meta and the alpha. And so Epsilon has to account for that. But there's also the fact that a few of the fragments actually kind of look very different than they did before. Like, Gamma sounds like Chief from Arby and the Chief now. He doesn't sound like Gamma. And he's like shredded. He's not wearing, director clothes. He's like a buff, he looks like Dr. Manhattan. And Theta, he has a different color scheme a little bit, and he sounds more robotic, not so happy. And as we know, Sigma looks now like a darker Agent Main with fire on his helmet, kind of. I think the reason they look different could be because, like Sigma said, the simulations that Church is running changed his memory of those fragments. And so therefore, they end up looking different after he disperses them to the Reds and Blues to help them get out of this situation. You know what I mean? And when he dispersed those fragments to the Reds and Blues, when he deleted himself in season 13, that could just be one iteration of time that happened. And as time is going on and things are failing and he's reverting back to the moment of season 13, the fragments evolve, change, his memory of those fragments change, and we could see the consequences of that. The differences in Theta, the differences in Gamma, the differences in Sigma. And on a side note, I really hope Locust returns for this season. I think this is the final opportunity to get the conclusion to Locust's past. Maybe get a cameo from Cyrus, find out what happened to Cyrus, get a little bit more of the Mercs trilogy. I know that there's a lot of stuff to fit into one last final season, so I highly doubt we'll get all of that. But I hope we get some sort of resolution to that character. We got a little bit of Locust in the previous seasons, but not too much. So clearly, if those are simulations that Epsilon's running, he's trying to take Locust's part in this into account. So hopefully we'll get Locust back in this season. I think a lot of this could pay off the actual reason why Sigma says, "You wonder why we're here," in the trailer. Yes, everyone always, every time they have the chance, has to say that line, but I think here there could be more of a meaning to it. Like, he's trying to figure out the past to figure out the future. And if he's missing pieces to figure that out, he's obviously wondering, why are we here at this moment? What is it that caused us to get here? What is the thing I'm forgetting that can help us for the future? And I think the fact that Allison is popping up to Epsilon, it's not exactly the fact that he's trying to bring Allison back, but I think Epsilon's starting to realize the parallels between him and the director. The director trying to save Allison tirelessly over and over and over again, and Church trying to save his friends tirelessly over and over and over again. And I think the memory of Allison keeps popping up to let him know, hey, don't become the director. Don't fall into that trap. You can do this. Do not give up. Do not make the wrong decisions. This is what you're becoming. And Sigma's noticing, and he's starting to take advantage. I wouldn't doubt if we got some sort of cameo from Allison and or Tex in this last season, but I doubt she's going to be a huge part of it, and I doubt he's going to try to resurrect her like she's the only one who can fix this whole situation, especially since she was based off of failure. So regardless of what would happen, he would know she would inevitably fail, so using her to try to save the Reds and Blues wouldn't make much sense, especially since that's why he deleted her in the first place. And I think if season 15, 16, 17, and 0 are actually simulations and not real, I think it could also explain certain situations in 0, like, for example, like I mentioned, the teleportation knife being connected to Epsilon's memory of the teleportation cubes and the fact that the pirates had those, and, accounting for putting that technology into a sword or a knife. But there's also the idea of Phase having the Hollow Echo, and knowing that technology is being advanced by Charon, he could always be considering, well, what if they have CT's armor ability to create, holographic copies, but they find a way to, upgrade it so heavily that there's maybe an AI running it and or have its own consciousness. I think Church is taking what he remembered and exaggerating them just in case he needs to, so the Reds and Blues can survive those kind of situations. You know what I mean? Things like Huggins and Muggins, things like the Cyclopses, those could be just things created by Church, just in case something like that could be done to help them. Like he's thinking so out of the box because he's ran millions of simulations and he's getting desperate. So I think those things will be made into simulations he created out of desperation to save his friends. We could instead be getting the cosmic powers as they were, but underpowered a bit, and be monitors, connect them to the monitor from season 7, start connecting some of the lore from the previous seasons to the last 4 seasons, but show the real version of it in season 19. And like I said, that could still connect to the last 4 seasons in a way by paying off some of those storylines and giving us answers to what was really happening. I really hope this season is amazing, especially since Bernie and Matt have returned, and I hope it's good closure for these characters and for this universe. It's certainly been one of my favorite universes, and I can't wait to see the end.